Bantam Audio Publishing presents The Black Rock Coffin Makers, adapted from the short story by Louis L'Amour. And now, a special introduction from Louis L'Amour.
It was wide-open range country when the first white men came. There were only buffalo and a few Indians, and contrary to general opinion, there were vast stretches uninhabited by anyone, visited only occasionally by hunters or wanderers. There are wide areas of plains country where he never went. Those stretches were too far from water in many cases, and dangerous for men on foot. Most of the American Indians were hunters and food gatherers, only a few were planters, and even those did not depend upon crops as a primary source of food. Cattle ran in thousands on the plains of Texas or in the valleys of California, which was the second largest cattle area in the Union. Until the Civil War ended, there had been no money on cattle. They were killed for their hides and tallow, the meat left to rot. During the Civil War, the cattle in the eastern states were killed for food, and when it ended, there was a demand for beef, and the great cattle drives began. Men got rich from driving cattle. There was grass everywhere, and the land belonged to whoever could control the water holes. Land without water was useless. So men moved in, settled on the land, and began to raise cattle. Then the homestead laws were passed, and the so-called nesters began to settle in the West. They chose water holes and filed claims, and the cattlemen suddenly saw their vast empires in danger. Naturally, they fought back. No matter that the nesters' claims were legal. They drove them out when they could, killed them when they couldn't. In any event, there was trouble. The best known of such fights was the Johnson County War in Wyoming. Recently, a motion picture was made about that war, but it had no relation to fact or to history. No Russian immigrants were involved. The men on both sides were Anglo-Irish or Scotch. The invaders, financed by the cattlemen, were driven out, but nobody was ever brought to trial for the killings they perpetrated. Stories such as the Black Rock Coffin Makers happened, and happened too frequently. The West was wild, and such men helped to keep it wild. But also, in the end, to tame it and turn it into a peaceful country it now is. Where the buffalo and the Indian used to roam, where the cattle wars were fought, there are now universities and hospitals, as well as farms that can feed half the world. The first cattlemen in the country, of course, were Mexicans from over the border, and we learned nearly everything we know about the cattle business from the Mexicans who were already doing it in northern Mexico and in Texas. And then some Anglos began to come out there and settle in the country and establish ranches of their own. And all that was necessary to gather a big herd was to have a running iron and a rope. A running iron was a type of branding iron that you could make any kind of a brand with. They later became illegal. You had to have a stamp brand. But in those early days, they used a running iron. And they would get out with a rope and catch a steer and put the brand on him, and then catch another one and put a brand on him. This continued, and this was how the big ranches were built. Later on, when some of the cowboys tried to do that on their own, they were considered rustlers. And a lot of our so-called outlaws actually began in that way. They had lots of different methods of branding cattle. They would sometimes use a cinch ring held between two sticks. A man who was a good rewrite man could do a good job with a cinch ring and a couple of sticks. He could make any brand he wanted. Also, sometimes they would use barbed wire, twisted in any form they wanted. But there was a lot of rebranding going on in the plains. But a man would gather usually about 2,500 head of cattle for a drive. Sometimes less, but that was considered the biggest number you could handle with ease. There were herds that were up to 3,000, 3,500, but they were too big. And when they sent a much bigger herd over the trail, they would break it up into small herds of 2,500 each. That would be handled by about 12 to 14 men. Usually there was somebody riding point. That means off in front. Then there were flankers, and then there was somebody riding a dead-end trail, riding the dust, the drag. There are several stories about how cattle got started in Texas. Of course, they were brought in by the Spanish. But there's one story, a very old story that isn't generally known, about a man who brought in several shiploads of cattle and horses. And he had been given about a third of what is now the state of Texas. He was a young Spanish gentleman, and he decided to move over here and make this his big estate. So he started up through the country, and at every stream he dropped off a stallion and a couple of mares, or a bull and a couple of heifers, and went all over the country doing this. He put out quite a lot of stock, 2 whole shiploads of stock, scattered over the country. Then he went back to Spain, and his future wife told him, "No way, I'm not going to leave Spain." And so he just left the cattle there, and they began to breed and increase, and nobody ever collected them. By the time the Civil War came along, there were millions of cattle in Texas that nobody had any claim to at all. Other men had brought cattle in and had scattered them over the country, and they had bred. The cattle increased until there were just millions of them down there. Nobody has ever figured out how many cattle there were. But over the time that the cattle drive started in the 1860s, on up until they ended along in the late 1880s, there were at least 10 million and probably 30 million head of cattle driven out of Texas north.
And now, The Black Rock Coffin Makers by Louis L'Amour.
There you are. A slice of apple pie and a pot of coffee. Will there be anything else, Jim?
Jim Gatlin had been up the creek and over the mountains and more than once had been on both ends of a six-shooter.
Well, no, I don't believe so. Thank you.
He was, at the moment, doing a thorough job of demolishing a thick stake and picking off the few isolated beans that had escaped his initial attack.
How do you suppose that old-timer knew my name?
He was 1,000 miles from home and knew nobody in the town of Black Rock. He glanced up and saw a short, stocky man in the doorway. The man gave one startled look at Jim and ducked back out of sight. Gatlin blinked in surprise, then shrugged and filled his coffee cup from the pot standing on the restaurant table.
It looked like he'd seen a ghost.
Puzzled, he listened to the rapidly receding pound of a horse's hoofs, then rolled a smoke and sat back.
I must just look like the dickens.
250 miles to the north was the herd he had driven up from Texas. The money the cattle had brought was in the belt around his waist. Behind him was the drive, the long, lonely nights sitting by the fire. Nothing remained now but to return to Texas, bank the profit, and pick up a new herd. The outer door opened again, and a tall girl entered the restaurant. She turned and started for the door leading to the hotel, then stopped abruptly as though his presence had only then registered. She turned, and her eyes widened in alarm. Swiftly, she crossed the room to him.
Are you crazy? Sitting here like that when the town is full of Wing Carey's men? Bill Trout is on his way over right now, and he's looking for a fight.
Ma'am, you've sure got the wrong man. He must be a lucky fellow, though, to have a pretty girl like you to worry about him.
But you're not. No, of course not. You're not Jim.
What? Well, that is my name, ma'am, but I'm a stranger here. I never saw the place till an hour ago.
She stepped back, puzzled. And then the door slammed open once more, and a man stepped into the room. He was tall and as thin as wire, and his dark eyes were angry.
Get away from him, Lisa. Right now.
The man's hand flashed for a gun, and Gatlin dove sideways to the floor, drawing as he fell. A gun roared in the room, then Gatlin fired twice. The tall man caught himself, jerking his left arm against his ribs, his face twisted as he gasped for breath. Then he wilted slowly to the floor, his gun sliding from his fingers. Gatlin got to his feet, staring at the stranger. He swung his eyes to the girl who just stood there staring at him.
What's going on in this town?
He mistook you for someone. We all did. A man named Walker. Jim Walker.
I'll be. The name's Gatlin, ma'am. Jim Gatlin. I'm just passing through. Leastways, I hope so.
There was a pounding of hooves in the street outside. She caught his hand.
There's no time to lose. Come on out the back.
But I'm not...
They won't listen to you. They'll kill you. Through here.
Look at that, Wing. He shot Bill Trout.
Where is he, damn it?
Must be out back. Come on.
Gatlin and the girl plunged out the back and into the alley behind the hotel. Unerringly, she led him to the left and then opened the back door of another building and drew him inside. Silently, she closed the door and stood close beside him in the darkness.
They gotta be out here somewhere.
Well, I'll stay here. You get the others.
Come on around. We got him cornered back here. Well, where is he? Well,
Shouts and
darn it,
curses
I know.
rang from the alley outside. A door banged and men charged up and down. Jim was still holding his gun, but now he withdrew the empty shells and fed 2 into the cylinder to replace those fired. He slipped a 6th into the usually empty chamber.
What is this place? Will they come here?
It's a law office. I work here.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?